Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. When I decided to take the leap and work from home full-time as a freelance graphic designer, I thought my biggest challenge would be landing enough clients to pay the bills. I had no idea that my biggest obstacle would actually be my neighbor, who somehow thought she had authority over my own house. Let me back up a bit. About 6 months ago, I finally got fed up with the corporate grind and decided to turn my side hustle into my main source of income. The timing felt right. I had a decent client base built up, and working from home would save me a fortune in commuting costs and coffee shop visits. The only problem was that I needed a proper home office space. My house is a modest 2-story place I bought 3 years ago. It has everything I need except for one thing: a good workspace with natural light. I had been using the kitchen table for my freelance work in the evenings, but that wasn't going to cut it for full-time design work. Color accuracy is crucial in my line of work, and artificial lighting just doesn't compare to natural daylight. I decided to convert the spare bedroom upstairs into my office. It was the perfect size and had decent ventilation, but there was one major problem. The room only had one small window facing the backyard, and the side wall that faced my narrow strip of side yard was completely blank. No windows at all. Working in there felt like being in a cave, and it was seriously affecting my productivity and mood. That's when I came up with what I thought was a brilliant solution. I would install a large dormer window on that blank side wall. It would flood the room with natural light and give me a nice view of my own side yard instead of staring at a blank wall all day. Now, I should mention my neighbor. Her name is Carol, and she's a retired woman in her late 60s who has made her entire identity about her supposedly award-winning English garden and being the unofficial neighborhood watch captain. When I first moved in, she seemed nice enough, if a bit nosy. But over the years, I started noticing some red flags. For instance, about a year ago, I came home to find a laminated note stuck to my trash can. It politely but firmly informed me that trash cans should be brought in within 2 hours of pickup time as per neighborhood standards. The thing is, there are no official neighborhood standards. We don't have an HOA, and the city doesn't care when you bring your trash cans in as long as they're not left out for days. Carol had just made up this rule and decided everyone should follow it. I thought that note was the peak of her busybody behavior. Boy, was I wrong. That was just the warm-up act. Anyway, back to my window project. Being a responsible homeowner, I did my homework before starting any construction. I checked the city building codes online and found that dormer windows were perfectly legal on my type of property. I confirmed there were no HOA restrictions because, well, there is no HOA in our neighborhood. I even called the city planning department to double check that I didn't need any special permits for this type of addition. Everything checked out, so I hired a reputable local contractor who came highly recommended. The guy had been doing this type of work for 20 years and knew all the local codes inside and out. We scheduled the work to start the following Monday. The first sign of trouble came on Sunday afternoon. The contractor had stopped by to drop off a small construction sign for the front lawn and to mark out the cutting area on the wall with chalk. Standard procedure, he told me. The markings would help his crew know exactly where to cut when they arrived Monday morning. I was inside working when I heard loud, angry voices outside. I looked out my front window and saw Carol marching across my lawn, holding a clipboard and looking like she was ready for battle. She was gesturing wildly at my contractor, who looked confused and was trying to back away from her. I rushed outside to see what was going on. Carol spotted me and immediately launched into her attack. She informed me in no uncertain terms that I absolutely could not put a window there. When I asked her why not, she claimed the window would look directly into her private garden sanctuary, violating her privacy and destroying the aesthetic of the entire neighborhood. I tried to stay calm and explain that the window would primarily look out onto my own side yard, which is just a 10-foot wide strip of grass between my house and my detached garage. There's really nothing to see except grass and the brick wall of my own garage. It wouldn't provide any meaningful view of her garden or her house. Carol completely dismissed my explanation. She waved her clipboard at me and made a claim that absolutely floored me. She declared that the strip of land where I planned to install the window wasn't even mine. According to her, it was a historical easement for her property, and her prize-winning azaleas were planted there. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I just heard. This woman was literally trying to claim ownership of part of my property. She then threatened to get a court injunction and sue both me and the construction company into bankruptcy if I proceeded with the window installation. My contractor looked uncomfortable and suggested we discuss this privately. After Carol stormed back to her house, he told me he'd seen this kind of neighbor dispute before and recommended I get everything sorted out legally before he started any work. He was willing to wait a few days while I figured things out, but he warned me that delays would cost extra. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Carol's audacious claim that she owned part of my property. She wasn't just telling me what to do with my house anymore. She was actively trying to steal my land. And that's when I decided that being the nice, accommodating neighbor was no longer an option. The harassment campaign started the very next day. Carol apparently spent her entire morning on the phone with the city planning department, filing bogus complaints about unauthorized construction, excessive noise, and improper permits. Even though we hadn't started any actual construction yet, the city inspector was obligated to respond to every complaint. Poor guy showed up Tuesday morning looking frustrated. He told me he'd already been out to 3 other properties that day because of similar complaints from the same caller. He did his inspection, confirmed that everything was in order and above board, and apologized for the inconvenience. But he warned me that if the complaints continued, he'd have to keep coming out and eventually the city might start charging me for nuisance calls. Wednesday brought another inspection. Thursday, yet another. Each visit meant I had to take time away from work to meet with the inspector, and my contractor was getting antsy about the delays. The project was supposed to take 3 days, but we hadn't even started, and it was already Friday. But Carol wasn't done. She launched a neighborhood smear campaign, going door to door telling anyone who would listen that I was building an illegal, unsightly extension that would lower everyone's property values. Most of my neighbors are reasonable people who minded their own business, but I could tell some of them were starting to look at me funny when I walked my dog. The final straw came the following Monday. I arrived home from a client meeting to find an envelope stuck to my front door. Inside was a formal letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, written on expensive letterhead and full of legal jargon. The letter officially demanded that I cease all construction activities immediately, citing property encroachment and privacy violations. Reading that letter, I felt my blood pressure spike. Carol had actually hired a lawyer to try to stop me from putting a window in my own house. The letter threatened immediate legal action if I didn't comply with their demands within 48 hours. But here's the thing about threatening letters from lawyers. They can be intimidating, but they also provide a clear path forward. Carol wanted to make this about legal property lines and official documentation. Fine. I decided to play the game by her exact rules. The first thing I did was call my own lawyer, a guy who'd helped me with my house purchase a few years earlier. He read the letter over the phone and started chuckling halfway through. He told me it was mostly bluster and intimidation tactics, but he recommended I get an official property survey done to settle the matter once and for all. Getting a professional land surveyor wasn't cheap. It cost me over $1,000 of my own money I'd been planning to spend on office furniture and equipment. But at that point, I was so angry about Carol's harassment campaign that I was willing to spend whatever it took to shut her up permanently. The surveyor was a no-nonsense guy who'd been doing this work for 30 years. He spent the better part of a day taking measurements, checking old property records, and placing temporary markers around both our properties. He told me the official report would be ready within a week. That was the longest week of my life. I kept imagining different scenarios. What if Carol was somehow right about the easement? What if there was some weird property line issue I didn't know about? What if I'd just blown $1,000 for nothing? The surveyor called me on a Friday afternoon and told me the report was ready for pickup. I drove to his office with my heart pounding, prepared for the worst. But when he handed me that official survey report and map, I felt a slow smile spreading across my face. The results were even better than I'd hoped for. As I'd suspected all along, the 10-foot strip of land where I wanted to install my window was 100% mine. There was no easement, no shared property rights, no historical claims. It was clearly marked as part of my lot on the original subdivision plat from when the neighborhood was built. But here's where it gets really good. The survey revealed something I definitely hadn't expected. Carol's prized stone patio, the centerpiece of her award-winning garden, was actually encroaching on my property by a full 5 feet. Not only that, but a large section of her landscaping and her decorative wrought iron fence were also on my land. I sat in my car in the surveyor's parking lot, staring at that map and laughing. Carol had paid a lawyer to draw a line in the sand, demanding official property boundaries be respected. The surveyor's map showed that her entire patio was on my side of that line. She hadn't just shot herself in the foot. She'd blown her whole leg off with a legal cannon. I drove straight to my lawyer's office and had him draft a response letter. The letter was professional and polite, but absolutely devastating. It informed Carol that after the survey she had specifically requested, my window installation would proceed as planned on my own property. But the letter didn't stop there. It also formally notified her that her fence, patio, and garden landscaping were illegally encroaching on my property and would need to be removed within 30 days, or I would have them removed at her expense and bill her for the service. This was my malicious compliance. Carol had insisted we settle this through lawyers and official property boundaries. I was complying with her wishes completely. These were simply the consequences of the legal process she had demanded. My lawyer hand-delivered the letter on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Carol was at my front door, but this time she looked very different. Gone was the clipboard and the aggressive posture. She looked panicked and was practically begging me to reconsider. She offered to let me have my window if I would just let her keep her patio. She claimed she'd spent thousands of dollars building that stone patio and couldn't afford to rebuild it. She even offered to pay for half the cost of my window installation as a gesture of goodwill. I listened to her politely, but my answer was firm. I told her that she was the one who wanted to involve lawyers and property markers. I had been perfectly happy being neighborly and working things out like adults, but she had insisted we become litigants instead. These were the results of the legal process she had started. Carol tried arguing that I was being unreasonable and vindictive. She claimed she had no idea her patio was on my property and that I should be understanding about an honest mistake. But I reminded her that she had threatened to sue me into bankruptcy over a window on my own property. She had harassed me with bogus city complaints and turned my neighbors against me with lies about illegal construction. An honest mistake was something you apologized for and tried to fix. What she had done was wage a campaign of harassment and intimidation. The next few weeks were incredibly satisfying to watch. While my contractor finally got to work on my window installation, Carol had to hire a crew to dismantle her beloved stone patio piece by piece. I could hear the sound of jackhammers and saws coming from her yard as they dug up her prize-winning flowers and removed her decorative fence. Meanwhile, my new window was taking shape beautifully. The contractor did amazing work, and when it was finished, my office was completely transformed. Natural light flooded the room, making it the perfect workspace I'd always wanted. But the best part was the view from my new window. I had an unobstructed view of my reclaimed 5-foot strip of land where Carol's patio used to be. To ensure privacy for both of us going forward, I planted a row of fast-growing evergreen hedges along the property line. They'll provide a nice green border and make sure we don't have to look at each other anymore. The whole ordeal cost Carol way more than it cost me. Between her lawyer fees, the cost of demolishing and rebuilding her patio on her own property, and replacing all the landscaping she had to remove, she probably spent close to $15,000. Meanwhile, my window project cost about $3,000, and even with the surveyor fees and lawyer costs, I came out way ahead. The neighborhood dynamics have completely changed too. Once word got around about what really happened, most of the neighbors distanced themselves from Carol. They realized she had been lying to them about my project and had actually been the one causing all the trouble. Carol has become a ghost since then. She used to spend hours every day working in her garden, always ready to chat with neighbors or comment on their property maintenance. Now she's never seen outside, and when she does venture out, she avoids eye contact with everyone. My new office has become my favorite room in the house. The natural light makes my design work so much easier and more enjoyable. I'm more productive than I've ever been, and several clients have commented on the improved quality of my color work. Sometimes I sit at my desk and look out my beautiful new window at my privacy hedge, and I think about the lesson Carol taught me. She tried to stop me from getting a window because she didn't want me looking at her property. Now, thanks to her own actions, I have a beautiful window with a lovely view of my hedge, and she has a smaller yard, a hefty legal bill, and the reputation as the neighborhood crazy person. Carol thought she could bully me into giving up my property rights through harassment and intimidation. Instead, she taught me that when an entitled person gives you trouble, you should always measure twice and cut once. You might just find out you own more than you thought you did. The whole experience has made me a much more confident homeowner. I know my property boundaries exactly now, and I'm not afraid to stand up to bullies who think they can push people around. My contractor even recommended me to some of his other clients who were dealing with difficult neighbors, and I've been able to help a few people navigate similar situations. Looking back, I'm almost grateful that Carol picked this fight with me. If she had just minded her own business, I never would have gotten that property survey done, and I might never have discovered that she was encroaching on my land. Her own greed and entitlement led to her downfall, and my office window serves as a daily reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just standing your ground and letting bullies defeat themselves. The funny thing is, if Carol had just approached me politely and expressed her concerns about privacy, I probably would have been willing to work with her. Maybe we could have installed a frosted window or positioned it differently. but instead she chose to lie, threaten, and harass me, thinking she could intimidate me into submission. That approach might work on some people, but it definitely backfired on her. Now every morning when I sit down at my desk to start work, I look out my beautiful new window and remember that property rights matter, surveys don't lie, and entitled neighbors who try to steal your land usually end up losing their own. Update: 6 months later. I thought my story with Carol was over, but life had a few more surprises in store. Several people asked me for updates, so here's what happened in the months after my window got installed. First, my business absolutely took off. Having that proper home office with natural light made such a difference in my productivity and the quality of my work. I was able to take on bigger projects and charge higher rates because my color accuracy improved dramatically. Within 3 months, I had a waiting list of clients, and I even hired a part-time assistant to help with the workload. The success allowed me to do something I'd been dreaming about for years. I decided to completely renovate my side yard where Carol's patio used to encroach. I hired a landscape designer and turned it into a beautiful garden space with native plants, a small water feature, and a seating area where I can take breaks from work. The view from my window went from a strip of grass to an actual garden paradise. But the real drama came about 4 months after the window incident. I was working late one evening when I heard shouting and what sounded like construction equipment running next door. I looked out my window and saw bright floodlights illuminating Carol's backyard. There was a crew of workers with a small excavator digging up her entire backyard. The next morning, I ran into my neighbor on the other side, an older gentleman who's lived here for 20 years. He told me that Carol had hired a company to install an underground sprinkler system for her rebuilt garden. But when they started digging, they hit something unexpected. Turns out there was an old septic tank buried in her backyard that had been decommissioned decades ago when the neighborhood was connected to city sewer. The previous owners never had it properly removed, just capped it off and covered it with dirt. When the excavator hit it, it cracked open and raw sewage from 40 years ago came bubbling up all over her yard. The smell was absolutely horrific. Even with my windows closed, I could smell it inside my house. Carol had to evacuate to a hotel while a hazmat crew spent 3 days cleaning up the mess and properly removing the old tank. The whole process cost her over $20,000 and her yard was completely destroyed. Here's where it gets even better. Because the contamination had spread into the soil, the health department required extensive testing to make sure it hadn't affected neighboring properties. Guess who had to pay for soil testing on my newly landscaped side yard? That's right, Carol. The testing revealed that my property was completely clean, but Carol's yard was so contaminated that she had to have the top 3 feet of soil completely removed and replaced with clean fill dirt. Her insurance company fought the claim, arguing that the septic tank issue was a pre-existing condition that should have been disclosed when she bought the house 15 years ago. While all this was happening, I found out something interesting from the city inspector who came to oversee the cleanup. He told me that Carol had been filing complaints about other neighbors too, not just me. Apparently, she'd been calling the city about everything from grass that was supposedly too long to fence repairs that supposedly violated city codes. The inspector was pretty fed up with her. He said that in 30 years of doing this job, he'd never had one person generate so many frivolous complaints. The city had actually started a file on her for abusing the complaint system, and they were considering charging her a fee for any future calls that turned out to be unsubstantiated. But the real kicker came when Carol tried to sell her house. All the septic tank drama had to be disclosed to potential buyers, along with the soil contamination issues. Real estate agents told her the property value had dropped significantly because of the environmental concerns and the history of neighbor disputes. She ended up listing the house for almost $50,000 less than comparable homes in the neighborhood. Even at that reduced price, it sat on the market for 8 months before someone finally bought it. The buyers were investors who planned to completely tear down the house and rebuild, which meant Carol's beloved garden was going to be destroyed anyway. During those 8 months while her house was for sale, Carol became increasingly desperate and unpleasant. She started leaving passive-aggressive notes on neighbors' cars about parking and putting flyers in mailboxes about maintaining property values. Most people just threw them away, but a few neighbors started complaining to the homeowners about harassment. The final straw came when Carol apparently decided that my evergreen hedge was growing too tall and was affecting her property value. She actually climbed over the fence one night with hedge trimmers and started cutting my plants. My security cameras caught the whole thing. I called the police this time, and Carol was arrested for trespassing and destruction of property. The hedge damage wasn't severe, but it was the principle of the matter. She spent a night in jail and had to pay a fine plus restitution for the damaged plants. When her house finally sold and she moved out, the whole neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. We actually had an impromptu block party the weekend after she left. It wasn't officially to celebrate her departure, but everyone seemed to be in a really good mood for some reason. The investors who bought her house turned out to be great neighbors. They completely renovated the property with beautiful landscaping that actually complemented my garden. They even came over to introduce themselves and ask if I had any concerns about their construction plans. What a difference it makes when people actually respect property boundaries and communicate like adults. My business continued to grow, and I eventually converted another room into a client meeting space. Having that window in my office became the foundation for transforming my entire career. Several other freelancers in the area have reached out for advice about setting up home offices, and I always tell them the same thing. Invest in natural light and don't let bullies stop you from improving your property. I also became something of a local expert on property disputes. My lawyer has referred several clients to me who were dealing with similar neighbor issues, and I've been able to help them navigate the process of getting surveys and standing up to harassment. One case was particularly satisfying. A young couple was being harassed by their neighbor about a fence they wanted to install. The neighbor claimed it would be too close to the property line and was threatening legal action. I helped them get a proper survey done, and just like with Carol, it turned out the complaining neighbor had been encroaching on their property for years with a shed and garden. Looking back on the whole experience with Carol, I realize it taught me some valuable lessons that have helped me in business and life. First, always get the facts before backing down from bullies. Second, sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to give them exactly what they're asking for. And third, karma has a funny way of working things out if you're patient enough to let it happen. My home office is still my favorite room in the house. The window that caused all the drama provides beautiful natural light, and the view of my garden is incredibly peaceful. Sometimes clients comment on how calm and productive the space feels, and I always smile when I tell them it was worth fighting for. Carol's old house looks beautiful now with its new owners, and the whole neighborhood feels more relaxed without the constant drama and complaints. Property values have actually gone up since she left, probably because potential buyers aren't scared off by stories of neighbor disputes and harassment. The moral of this whole saga is simple. Respect your neighbors, know your property boundaries, and don't try to bully people into giving up their rights. If Carol had just been reasonable from the beginning, she could have saved herself thousands of dollars, months of stress, and ultimately her home in the neighborhood. Instead, her entitlement and aggression led to a chain of events that cost her far more than she ever could have imagined. My window project cost $3,000 and improved my life immeasurably. Her attempts to stop it cost her over $50,000 when you factor in legal fees, the patio removal, septic tank cleanup, and the reduced sale price of her house. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well and letting bullies dig their own graves. And every morning when I sit down at my desk and look out my beautiful window, I'm reminded that standing up for yourself isn't just about winning a particular battle, it's about setting a precedent that you won't be pushed around. And that lesson tends to pay dividends for years to come. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This is a very old revenge from when I was a teenager in the 90s. There were only a few PC gamers around at the time, and without internet, it was hard to get hold of new games. Me and a friend bought games from abroad via airmail because local stores didn't sell many, but these weren't cheap. We'd trade them with each other and would copy the copy protection, which was often included, so this made it semi-affordable for us. A new kid joined our class, however, and his uncle had tons and tons of games we didn't have. We offered to trade games with him and gave him our original copies for him to copy, and in return we got corrupted floppies. Yes, this was the 90s, missing copy protection, etc. And after a few months of this, we received not a single working game while he had received all of our games. The Settlers, Doom 2, Monkey Island games, etc. And some he returned in less than nice condition. We had enough and we wanted to get revenge, but we didn't know how. Now, the 90s were known for the many AIDS campaigns after Freddie Mercury died of AIDS in 1991. I was a huge fan of Queen, and this new friend would often mock me for liking a gay singer. He came from a very conservative family, and his mother was quite Catholic, and this is what gave us an idea when we had to attend an AIDS event, organized by a certain foundation with our class. At the end, we were given flyers about AIDS, homosexuality, etc., and free condoms with the logo of the AIDS Foundation were up for grabs. We each grabbed a few for reasons you'll soon reach below. Me and my friend were one of the very few with a computer and inkjet printer at home, so we got this idea to screw him over. We created a fake letter addressed to our friend, pretending we were the AIDS Foundation, copying the logo and everything to make it look as authentic as possible. It went something like this. Dear First Name, thank you for your letter. We understand it's difficult being open about being homosexual, and you have many questions after the event you attended with your class. Please find enclosed a flyer which should answer many of your questions as well as some condoms. Please practice safe sex at all times. We enclosed all the flyers we had gotten at the event as well as the condoms and mailed it to Mr. Last Name to guarantee his father would open the letter first. We had no idea the crap storm this would create. We knew him being homophobic. This would be great revenge. But apparently his mother had been in tears, screaming, his father angry, and he was grounded for weeks with his parents convinced he was gay. In the end, he figured we had something to do with it because we had been carefully fishing to see if our prank had succeeded. But at first, he thought the letter was authentic and we had contacted the foundation in his name. When we finally confessed we had faked it all, we had a nice trip to the principal to explain why we had done this with his parents present. It's still the best revenge I ever took in my life, even though it was 30 years ago. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I was a teacher at a middle school in 2014-2015 that was Title I school. Extremely low income and test scores. The state government actually removed all administration staff 2 years prior for the whole district, as the student outcomes were so low. The new admin came in with a micromanagement authoritarian directive to improve test scores. One of their brightest ideas was to put lanes in the hallways to manage flow and get students to classes faster. There were 3 lanes, 2 one-ways along the walls and a middle teacher-only lane. Within about 3 days, all the students were driving imaginary cars. They orderly followed one another, would let people in to merge, used turn signals, and generally was pretty fun for a few days. The teachers would direct students at intersections and played along for a bit. The flow did slow down, though, as students wouldn't pass each other and would have trouble merging into traffic around doorways. Another thing taking time was the students parking their imaginary vehicles outside the classroom. They would spend time backing them into spaces or have trouble parallel parking. The admin didn't like this and really started getting angry at the staff and students as so many kids were still tardy to class. They actively were handing out detentions and pretty angry at staff for playing along. This really triggered the students to start getting malicious. The students couldn't cross the middle lane, so they would have to walk down long hallways and make U-turns to see their friends or get to their lockers' classrooms. They started cruising the long hallways with their tricked-out imaginary lowriders. They would have shock noises even. Some of the really popular kids started a bus system where they had a schedule to pick up other students and deliver them to other classes. They would hold shoulders and move as a block. Sometimes the bus broke down at an intersection and blocked traffic for everyone. Drag racing started where they held up traffic and raced down the hallways. Police would pull people over and write tickets. The most annoying part was students needing to leave the classroom to check on their cars to make sure no one stole it. Sometimes a student would come back from the bathroom and ask if anyone was driving a type of car as it was being towed. The disruptions in class started to really get out of control. Admin thought it was going to be a phase and students would get bored. The best part about school for the students turned out to be the time in between classes. Everyone was tardy constantly. Eventually the lanes, tape, were ripped up and they shortened the passing period time by 2 mines, so students had to rush to class and couldn't spend any time in the hallways. The cars slowly died out and the new fad was needing to use the restroom during class time because the passing period was like 3 mins long and not enough toilets to satisfy all the students legitimately. Students were written up for needing to use the bathroom, so kids just started clogging toilets and peeing wherever. Other car things. Flat tires, emergency sirens, car accidents, GPS problems, no gas, lost license, couldn't find keys, stole other kids' cars, repo cars, towing cars. The next one is an entitled people story. First time posting here, but I am pissed. I work at a restaurant, one of those local, small, cutesy bistros. That's not super upscale, but usually fully booked because we're in an awesome location and don't have many tables. We recently had a woman email us saying that she wants to bring her boyfriend here to celebrate a very special event. I won't say what to not make it too personal. It's not unusual to receive more detailed table requests for special occasions every now and then. It can range from booking a whole seating area for privacy to asking to put up some decor, etc. This lady didn't really ask for much. She just asked if she could pay up front to have a more secluded, decorated table. We love these kind of reservations when people ask nicely and are realistic about it. We closed off a little corner of the restaurant. Nothing crazy, it's still open to the rest, but in a little nook that you can't see into, and put up some string lights, candles, and flowers. She also came in earlier that night to put up something of her own. Again, I don't want to say what, but it was clearly a personal item. Well, the night of, the couple arrives, gives me their last name, and IFC know immediately who they are and happily lead them to their very special table. only to find an old lady and a little kid sitting there with their belongings all over the damn place. Turns out they thought the "Please wait to be seated" sign, the "Closed for private event" sign, and the "Reserved" sign somehow did not apply to them. They barged right past everything when no one was looking. There were only 2 of us working the tables that night because the place is small, and sure enough simply claimed the only free table. Now some people just have zero awareness, so part of me had to assume that maybe they were a little slow. I tried to confront them very nicely, even though I was panicking with the couple right behind me. But oh boy, that older lady knew exactly what she was doing and immediately blew up about no one tending to their table and making them wait. I explained that this table was reserved and that they needed to leave and that the whole place was fully booked. She explained to me loudly that she did not care, that the other restaurants on our block were full, and that her and her grandson have every right to be here. It took a lot of arguing between them and me and my coworkers, but when we threatened to call the police to have them removed, she gave up. Unfortunately, most of the damage was already done. It left everyone in a pretty sour mood, and to make matters even worse, the kid had tampered with the sweet woman's personal item that she had put up there right before. It wasn't a valuable, just a cute little surprise. The couple looked pretty upset, and while they didn't blame us for anything, I could just tell how close to tears the woman was. The surprise she had planned was a pretty big deal, and I simply felt awful for her. I've always heard stories about having to deal with crazy people in the service industry, but this was a first for me. I'm just a student doing this some nights a week for some extra cash. My absolute deepest condolences to anyone dealing with this *T for a living. Anyway,